All right, so without further ado, quick round of applause for Zach Benedict, and I'm going to turn our screen over here to him.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. Thanks for doing this. I wanted to use this opportunity to put together some thoughts on a somewhat heavy theme. It's not every day you get asked to describe the meaning of life in 20 minutes. At the same time, I didn't want this to be a discussion necessarily about passion, impact, or love, as so often the topic seems to gravitate towards. So I thought it would be interesting to talk about purpose in more of an objective way, if that's possible. At a fundamental level, I think our purpose is to live, to thrive, to exist as best we can. We are genetically programmed to survive. But what does that mean? How does it manifest itself in a societal context? And maybe more interesting, what does it suggest from a biological perspective? We often summarize this discussion under the category of health, but too often we don't take the time to define what that means. Wendell Berry has this wonderful quote where he says, community, in its fullest sense, a place and all its creatures, is the smallest unit of health, and that to speak of the health of an isolated individual is a contradiction in terms. Our well-being is an exercise in context, and in many ways, so is our purpose. Our health is determined by several things, none more than the factors that frame our everyday routine. Research shows us that zip code has a much larger impact on our health than our genetic code. The built environment is a behavioral system. Where we live changes how we live, influencing our ability to interact with the world around us. And that process, that ability to engage, regulates our capacity to thrive and collaborate with others. Now, I don't think the idea of cooperation is unique to humans, far from it. It's commonplace in social animals, from apes to ants. Take, for example, this deep sea car wash. These groupings of feeder fish are willing to clean everything and anything from turtles to whales. Sharks will even participate in these, letting the fish clean their teeth without exhibiting aggressive behavior. Now, if they were solely interested in the short-term self-interest, they would eat the fish, but they don't. Partly because they instinctively know the value of cooperation, unconsciously appreciating the fact that they will need another dental appointment sometime in the future. You see this all over nature, without categorizing it as mercy or compassion. But when we see similar behaviors in humans, we immediately differentiate it as altruistic, which at its core ignores the value of cooperation and the efforts of both parties involved. If we looked at a neighborhood of people with the same objectivity that we analyze a school of fish, I think we would quickly see just how much our ability to cooperate with others can impact the quality of lives of ourselves and those around us. Everyone in this photo is providing value in some way, no different than in a neighborhood when we are all permitted to participate. Matt Ridley wrote this beautiful book called The Origins of Virtue, and in it he says, society works not because we have consciously invented it, but because it is an ancient product of our evolved predispositions. It is literally in our nature. We are, misanthropes notwithstanding, unable to live without each other. Even on a practical level, it is probably 1 million years since any human being was entirely and convincingly self-sufficient, able to survive without trading skills for those of his fellow humans. Our purpose, I think, is rooted in our ability to cooperate. Our success at both the micro and macro scales is relying on our capacity to collaborate with one another. More specifically, it depends on our ability to participate in these reciprocal relationships that improve the communal condition, an equation that sincerely focuses on the phenomenon of engagement, trust, and value. So there's this idea of reciprocity is a powerful one, and it works at various scales. There's this old adage, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, but it's more nuanced than that. One key distinction is understanding the difference between what I'll call a consumer model versus a cooperative one. That first image on the left suggests a situation where we would find ourselves able to engage with trusted partners to provide goods or services. You find a relationship or a service that you trust, and you search it out so that they can provide you something. But the second one on the right describes a situation where mutual trust assumes both sides of the equation can and will provide value in some way. The trick is that sometimes it's hard to spot the difference between the two. So think about the relationship between a restaurant diner and a waiter. At face value, this could be described as a simple, one-sided consumer transaction. But then think of the loyal customer, that regular, that guy that comes every morning to order his usual meal and give their abbreviated thoughts on weather and politics. This is different. The food is not the only provision here. His continued dedication as a repeat customer provides a steady, albeit modest, financial support for the restaurant. But more than that, they both are providing each other their time, their friendship, and their trust. They are simply using the restaurant as a vehicle to trade those goods. These reciprocal relationships are extremely important, not only for the local economy, but our survival as a species. If you look at the key elements that can reduce your chances of dying the most, it is partially populated with the staples of healthy living. Exercise, weight loss, vaccinations, they all make the list. But the two most effective ways to increase longevity are entirely focused on our ability to socialize with one another. First off, presence of close relationships. Second, successful social integration. So as Susan Pinker noted in her book, The Village Effect, there is a mounting evidence that a rich network of face-to-face relationships creates a biological force field against disease. And that's not a trivial realization. If we look at these two elements more carefully, we find a distinction between developing close relationships and social integration. Close relationships, sometimes called bonding relationships, represent small groups of people whom we intimately trust and consistently cooperate with, relationships that are often nurtured by face-to-face contact. On the other hand, social integration, sometimes referred to as bridging relationships, define our ability to access a large network of people. This tends to have the capacity to improve someone's chances of escaping poverty and has been dramatically improved by social media. It's the basis of LinkedIn. 6 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon is a way to think about these bridge relationships. The first are the people you go to for a hug or a ride to the airport. The second are the people you go to for a referral for a dentist or a job offer. They're both critical to how you understand the community in which you live. The primary reason these two are so critical to our health and longevity is when absent, we are left to deal with the catastrophic side effects of loneliness. The sensation of loneliness is an evolved warning system designed to serve as an internal alarm. Feeling lonely is as painful as being wildly hungry. Since the human brain evolved at a time when social cohesion meant survival, while isolation meant starvation and certain death, our sense of loneliness is intended to send a biological signal to warn us that we've been separated from the group and are in danger. We're not meant to be by ourselves, but many of us are. If given the attention it deserves, loneliness could easily be classified a national emergency. Almost half the country claims to not have meaningful in-person social interactions on a daily basis, the very thing we know can extend your expected lifespan. 1 in 5 of us rarely or never feel close to people, resulting in the feeling of loneliness becoming as harmful to our health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And these statistics were all published prior to the recent pandemic, and we all know how that has felt in the last few months. Truth is, a good portion of us already live alone. 36 million Americans, to be exact, live in an existence that, in a different context, is reserved for the most severe forms of punishment. We know a lot about the impact of solitary confinement with research on prisoners. Studies have shown diffuse slowing of the brain waves after 1 week of solitary confinement. Some prisoners, who only social contact was a food tray shoved through a slot in the door, became catatonic or developed autistic features. Others regressed, having panic attacks and becoming extremely aggressive. Yet this isolation is a growing reality for millions of Americans, and we've all had a glimpse of what that feels like during the recent pandemic. It's an odd realization to hear these levels of isolation when we're all fully aware of how connected we might feel with the growing innovations of social media. But in some ways, that's the problem. Since World War II, we have built communities that prioritized independence and privacy over cooperation and reciprocity, which spawned an entire technological revolution aimed at repairing these broken social networks. But our brains know the difference. And what research shows us is that the more we use social media, the lonelier we feel. Not because we don't feel like we know what others are doing, because we can't cooperate and be part of it in a seemingly meaningful way. We need to get better at understanding the dangers of loneliness and the effects isolation has on people of all ages and abilities. More importantly, I think we need to start taking ownership in developing tribal structures that prioritize a sense of connectivity and belonging. This is often referred to as social capital, a term sociologists use to define our relationship with friends, neighbors, and coworkers. It's the lifeline to the resilient community and one of the most meaningful factors in enhancing the health and well-being of those around us. Too often, though, I think the idea of social capital is dismissed as a feel-good theory that has no real impact in the measurable success of a tribe. But it depends on how you measure success. Take, for example, breast cancer. Women with a large network of friends are 4 times more likely to survive breast cancer than those with sparse connections. One of the hidden mechanisms linking social interaction to the recovery of humans was a social context switched on and off the genes that regulate our immune response to cancer and the rate of tumor growth. Having friends literally keeps us alive. So how do we define this better? How can we how can we be more effectively connect the factors with which we define our individual purpose? I don't know. I've thought about this since I was invited to give this talk. Here's what I think right now. I think before we can participate in these valuable reciprocal relationships, it seems to me we need in some way to go through 4 stages. We need to feel as though we belong. We need to feel as though we can engage. We need to feel as though we can be trusted. And lastly, we need to feel as though we can provide. Our ability to cooperate with each other is defined by these 4 elements, but it's a linear process, and I don't think it can be done out of order and still garnish sustainable results. Now, these aren't insignificant ideas. In fact, they are the backbone to our health, happiness, and economy. In a way, this is our purpose. Belonging is the initial priority. We need to feel as though we are part of a tribe, and we are continually seeking out tribal identities that support us all the time. Our happiness often is a result of that sense of belonging. Think of happiness as the opposite of loneliness, the feeling that washes over us when we feel as though we belong and are part of a broader group, whether it's an inside joke or a neighborhood block party. Jonathan Haidt wrote in the Happiness Hypothesis, he says, "I don't believe there is an inspiring answer to the question, what is the purpose of life? Yet by drawing on ancient wisdom and modern science, we can find compelling answers to the questions of purpose within life. Happiness is not something you find, acquire, or achieve directly. You have to get the conditions right and then wait. You have to belong. Once we feel as we belong, no small step in and of itself, our capacity to engage is limited by access and ability, 2 factors that change dramatically over the course of our lives. We need approachable opportunities that participate in society, and many of us need encouragement to support and try new things. These opportunities are governed by everything from accessible legislation and development incentives to cognitive wayfinding and gang territory lines. So once we feel as though we belong and we start to engage, we need to develop a sense of trust, which can only be done through repetition. One of the reasons zip code analysis tells us a lot about quality of life is that walkable neighborhoods are not only healthier, they exponentially increase repetitive social interactions. It's hard to run into strangers while you're stuck in traffic. And these seemingly innocent interactions are the backbone to trust and the seeds that grow our individual reputations. So once we feel as though we belong, have started to engage, and have developed some sense of mutual trust, we then can finally communicate our ability to provide. But only after that first 3 conditions have been met. The value you can provide hopefully will grow over time, but no matter your ability, you can begin to participate in reciprocal relationships. It's a scalable endeavor, one that delicately balances the challenges we face against our evolving abilities to solve these problems. As soon as you mow the grass, you should try it. As soon as you can do it well, you should be encouraged to mow the neighbor's grass. As your abilities grow, so does your opportunity to provide value for others. It's a skill set that we should be teaching people of all ages. I think we need to start thinking about our communities as platforms for cooperation. The sooner we can understand this, the sooner we can improve their ability to foster reciprocal relationships for all people. But we need to be more critical about how our surroundings are nudging our behaviors. When comparing 2 experiences like this, it's easy to talk about the car or the walkability. We might take these conversations more seriously, though, if we started claiming that the image on the left portrays an environment that limits our capacity to cooperate, reduces our ability to develop reciprocal relationships, and diminishes our sense of purpose. Now that sounds dramatic, but that is precisely what this experience is doing at some level. Or acknowledging that the majority of our differences are fabricated for effect, leveraging our tribal desires to create an us versus them phenomenon that doesn't add any measurable value. Compare that to how children define similarities. These two boys on the right were on the news recently because they got matching haircuts to confuse their teacher. They were convinced she wouldn't be able to tell them apart. To them, they were identical. Sometimes the most valuable reciprocal relationships are when the wisdom is provided by those that see the world differently than we do. Or thinking about how we can better evaluate our homes based on their ability to foster a sense of belonging, engagement, and trust. Because in this context, that's their primary role. Fortifying our homes doesn't make us safer. Living in reciprocal tribes does. I don't know what the meaning of life is. And in a metaphysical sense, I can't tell you with any confidence why any of us are here. But our purpose seems slightly more obvious. Over the last few thousand years, we have evolved into complicated cooperation machines, whose sole focus is to utilize partnerships as a survival mechanism. And this machinery is powered by our sense of belonging, engagement, and trust. That's why when you're alone, when we're isolated and nervous about the world around us, we feel overwhelmed. We need that connection, that network of reciprocal relationships that we support and in turn support us. This isn't rocket science. We need each other for more reasons than we care to admit, and we'll be better off the sooner we accept the fact and start empowering others to belong, to engage, to trust, and to provide. We are in this together. Our purpose is to not forget that. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Zach. All right, guys, one round of applause for Zach Benedict from your house here. That was awesome. All right. Well, before we get started in with the questions, I have a couple quick announcements. First of all, if you guys do have questions for Zach, since you're all on mute, we're going to ask you to please type those questions into the chat, and then I'll turn this over to Colin soon, and he's going to kind of run our Q&A. Before that, though, I did forget to tell you guys a couple things about our Love Bomb Challenge. If you guys participated in the Love Bomb Challenge this week and purchased one of those buy one, get one, give one Conjure gift cards, please be sure to email your name and your email address to Kristen Giant at Hyperlocal Impact. I believe the email address is giftcards@hyperlocal.com. So please make sure you send that to her, otherwise you won't be able to get your free ArtLink membership. Also, Kristen wanted me to let you guys know that since we reached our goal, her business, Hyperlocal Impact, is going to be making a $500 donation to the Cinema Center. And for those of you guys who don't know, the Cinema Center in Fort Wayne is our art house theater. They're the only art theater, to my knowledge, in Fort Wayne, potentially Northeast Indiana as a whole. But they really play a vital role in our creative community. And obviously now that movie theaters have been closed due to COVID-19, they're really hurting for donations. So please be sure just to give a shout out to Hyperlocal Impact for the great work that they're doing. And you can actually watch Cinema Center movies online. Fun fact, they are screening some movies that you can stream from your home. So check out the Cinema Center in Fort Wayne and rent a movie for yourself this weekend. All right. Yeah, and just to confirm that that gift cards address is giftcards@hyperlocalimpact.com. So be sure to send that email. I'm going to turn this over to our teammate Colin, and he is now going to be managing the Q&A.
I'm on mute. Okay, cool. Hi guys. First of all, Zach, that was so neat, so much needed personally for me. I know through this entire thing, it's kind of hard to really find your purpose, and to kind of have that all kind of like laid out was just fantastic. Okay, so I have one right here. It is Zach. How can we foster cooperation now while the majority of us are separated, working from home, socially distanced from family and friends? And are there any lessons to be learned from remote cooperation moving forward?
Two-part question, two-part answer. Lessons learned, I hope one of the things that is a result of the shutdown is that it reprioritizes social interaction for an entire generation that I think prior to that would have taken it for granted. And to think about it, how lonely do we all feel stuck at our house, even though we have every bit of technology at our fingertips, just doesn't quite feel the same. I think that's probably the primary benefit in my mind of what was pandemic. In terms of virtual cooperation, it sounds silly, but there is a drastic difference in how your brain reacts to facial cues. So when in doubt, inundate your mom with FaceTime calls. It's different than a text message because our brain recognizes that almost as a quality face-to-face physical communication. So the more you can do Zoom meetings, virtual meetings, web conferences, video communication over chats, likes, Facebook, all that other stuff, the more your brain at least thinks you're getting that exposure to those bonded relationships. So I think the biggest thing is to make sure that you try to prioritize those in the short term.
Fantastic. Okay, another one. This is from Alec Johnson. How does the physical characteristics foster or prevent, and quote unquote, all in this together community, neighborhood design, setbacks, etc.?
Well, take this from what it's worth to a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. I am an architect as a disclaimer. So I think the built environment has everything to do with this. And the design profession largely has really survived the last 50 years without coming to grips or taking responsibility for the actions and emotions those environments have imposed on people. Some of the bigger issues that I think are harder to change, but probably affect these discussions the most, is single-use zoning. The idea that our entire residential appraisal system is based on comparable purchases. So you couldn't even get a loan to buy a house that was different price point than the one next door. That becomes a real problem because it develops these pockets of monocultures where everyone looks the same, acts the same, leaves for work at the same time and comes home. And that diversity or lack thereof really plays into our ability to identify opportunities because we don't really see that diversity in a way. There's an interesting study that said pre-World War II, the number one way a child defined social roles was with the activity that they were exposed to on the sidewalk. Like that's how you in your mind decided, okay, that's what a dad does, that's what a mom does, that's how you defined what normal was. Research now shows us that most of those kids define those social norms through reality TV. So think about that next time you're watching Survivor with your kids. That I think shows you the impact the built environment can have and what happens when it's not providing that value. So there's a whole bunch of research on what the impacts are, but I think imposing a sense of non-diversity is probably the biggest one.
Awesome, thank you. And then this is from our own Kara Hackett. What impacts are you already seeing from COVID-19 in our communities? And what are some early predictions you have for our future?
I think one of we have this real big myth in this country that we're independent. It's not true. It's never been true. I created this PowerPoint on a computer that if it's broke, I can't fix to give it to a whole bunch of strangers, assuming one of you might think I'm smart one day and we could collaborate on something, right? So I could get some food to feed my family from a grocery store that gets their food from a farmer I'll never meet. Also, I can tell myself when I look in the mirror, I'm independent. That's not how this works. We survive on this interconnected string and networked reliances on other people. I think what this did for a lot of people, whether they liked it or not, really highlighted that fact that they were relying on more people than they cared to admit. And the second they couldn't easily access them or their services, they didn't know what to do. I've needed a haircut for 3 weeks. My new barber that lives in my house, their customer service isn't nearly the same as my old one. And that sounds silly, but I don't know what else to do about it. I'm just going to grow a ponytail, I guess. And that has been what has transpired over these, when you see the news rallies with people protesting, to open back up, the number one complaint is they want a cheeseburger. It's the number one complaint. Why? Don't know. Gives them a sense of independence. They can go anywhere they want, buy anything they want. And that to me has been the highlight of this entire phenomenon. Is it really, I think, put at center stage, whether we're articulating it with this language or not, that none of us are as independent as we thought. And if we approach things that way, I think the discussions will be a lot more civil.
Awesome. Okay, let me get this. Okay. Does the need or purpose of reciprocity vary based upon age? For example, how does the need for social interaction play a role in developing children versus middle-aged / adult versus the aging / elderly?
You could argue that the need or purpose of reciprocity doesn't change, but how you can play the game does. So it's really important for children that you balance challenges with abilities. But no different than a new hire right out of school, right? You want them to feel like you're giving them a challenge that exceeds their abilities, and then everybody does a high five when you can pull that off. So in children, you see it frequently, and there's a lot of research around how to do that. There's not a lot of research how to do that with emerging professionals, but there should be. And it's one of the reasons they're gravitating more towards walkable neighborhoods, is they can reciprocate. They can cooperate with others. The example I gave in a previous talk was, we do a lot of work with retirement communities, senior living facilities, and they have these things called activity coordinators, where your job is to come up with activities for the group to do. But in talking with them, we thought it might be better to have an engagement coordinator that's dealing with a person's individual abilities. And the example we used is, we had a client who had a resident in a dementia care wing who consistently complained about the quality of the folding of the towels. She had a real objection to how bad it was being done and complained about it every day. So they made her the CEO of towel folding. Every day, they'd walk in, dump all the towels in the folding room, and she'd spend hours folding towels, quote unquote, the right way. Was that of value? Depends on how you define it. She thought she was having an impact, and in some ways, that's good for everybody. It also reduced her use of psychotropic drugs. So when we have this sense of value, whether it's real or perceived, I think you can see the value of that perception just spreads across a network like wildfire.
Okay, we have 2 more questions. And this is from our own Devontae Beckwin. What would you say to communities that lack diversity / social interaction in terms of building better relationships?
Well, one is you can't, communities have no right to complain about their zoning because they're rules you impose upon yourselves. So change those. The other thing I think is to try to understand and define what diversity should look like in your situation. And that's not necessarily, I think too often it's strictly talking about race, which is a huge part of that component, but just as equally is diversified income and time. If you could solve those 2 problems, you'd be amazed at how diverse the demographics get. It's the reason, I don't know if it's still the case, as recent as 5 years ago, nonviolent crime was higher in gated communities than in non-gated communities. If you're gonna steal something, at least you know where to go. And the gate just drives a highlighter around neighborhoods of people that got stuff. So those pockets tend to create all kinds of nuisances, really, that we end up then having to, from a top-down initiative, trying to solve these problems. Or if we could develop a diverse community, and there's a reason you'll hear the phrase eyes on the street are so important to defensible space. There is not a single neighborhood cop that is more effective than a nosy neighbor. It doesn't exist. The problem is you need a nosy neighbor that's staying at home while you're at work. And that's not going to happen if every single house is catered towards a specific demographic. So that diversity of disposable time means the world to everything. And what you find is if you have that sense of disposable time, what ends up resulting is a really wide mosaic of cultures and backgrounds. The trick is trying to establish a narrative and a jurisdictional authority that allows that to happen and manifest on its own.
Okay, we have two more questions. And then this is, Zach, what neighborhoods in Fort Wayne serve as good examples of creating a network/community?
I don't think of it that way. Networks aren't, or neighborhoods aren't places. They're people, and they change with the people involved. I know some really good neighbors. They would be in good neighborhoods no matter where they lived. Now, some neighborhoods make that easier, admittedly, and you can argue that by just pre-World War II, post-World War II. I mean, you can get real simple like that for the most part, and you could probably make the claim that pre-World War II neighborhoods make it easier, but it doesn't necessarily make them perfect. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. They attract extroverts that want to be part of something, right? And you don't need everybody to be that way, but you need a couple. And as long as you get a couple, then everyone comes on board. I mean, the 07's the same physical neighborhood it was 10 years ago. It's got different people in it now. If you asked me a decade ago, is that a good neighborhood? I don't think that would have been on anybody's list. Now it probably is the first one on everybody's list. But it's not because the environment changed that dramatically. If anything, it changed at all. What happened was there's different people living there now with different priorities and a different sense of what a neighbor should behave like. And that means the world.
That's so great. Okay, this is the last one, and it is this is kind of a comment/question. So I'm a young adult, but I secretly want to live in a retirement community for young people. I'm the same way, but like a dorm community for adults. I know they have living options like these in some cities, but not really here in Fort Wayne yet. Is this something that could happen here? Why or why not?
I'd have to know why you want to do that. I mean, it's a similar reason that we find dorm life in college so interesting. Just like the previous question with the neighborhood thing, that type of living can teeter on being really vibrant and engaging and really depressing and isolating. And a lot of it has to do with the architectural cues of the built environment, but also the people involved. I mean, there has been a growing interest in things like co-housing, but a resurgence that was popular in the 60s and 70s. I mean, we're not reinventing the wheel here. What I think I think what people are really instinctively gravitating towards is the shared commons and trading that off from privatized territory. So that's a lot of jargon, but meaning I'd rather not have a 3,000 square foot home if I had 6 public amenities I could share with 50 other houses, right? Given the choice, I would take the latter. And retirement communities, the entire economics of it is based on the amenities they can provide the residents' children. Those are who make those decisions. So you base those amenities on the perceptions of the children placing their parents in a facility like that. And you have to be cognizant of what they would define as a utopial condition for a community. And most of us gravitate towards the perception of quality amenities. You always hear the number one reason people move to your community is quality schools. It's still true, but you ever ask why or how you judge if a school's good or not? Nobody checks graduation rates or teacher evaluations. You're there on a Saturday because you're deciding whether or not you want to move into this community. You drive around the school your kids might go to and you judge it by how well the lawn is maintained. Weeds mean bad school. Good grass means good grades. Not true, but that's the perception. Oh, they value that school. That place looks like a good place. We judge the quality of these environments based on really gut instinctive responses. which can work in our favor. Right now it's working in the favor of the 07. People are going there because of the brand. And it's a brand that a handful of individuals created over a really short period of time. These things can change rapidly if given a threshold for civil disobedience, right? To try to understand that you're going to take this on your own terms. My brother's my neighbor because we got sick of going over to each other's house. So we just figured out how to do that. And then my best friend lives behind me now, and we're going to take over a neighborhood. Life's too short not to. And I think we're realizing now that that's not an impossible feat. We are the ones that are managing these neighborhoods. Therefore, we should be the ones in charge of how they're operated as a collective group. And that's what I think people want when they say they want to live in a retirement community or a college dorm. Is there's some fascination with A, the idea of no maintenance, and B, the idea that a collective group of people are going to decide this from the bottom up. Neither one are necessarily true in either one of those types of buildings, but I think that's the perception.